The air carried the smell of fresh earth mixed with lavender as the vineyard prepared for celebration. White chairs lined the rows like soldiers, each marked with a ribbon that caught the light. Guests whispered while music floated softly through the hills. But beneath the beauty was a tension you could almost touch. Have you ever felt your dignity tested in front of everyone you love, when you knew a single moment could define how the world saw you? That was the weight pressing down as I stood watching the scene unfold. The barn doors stood open, polished floors reflecting sunlight, while the long tables inside were set with silverware that gleamed like small weapons. Every detail looked perfect, but perfection has a way of hiding cracks. Behind the laughter and polite greetings, an unease stirred like a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. People smiled, but the kind of smile that hides questions. They were here for joy, yet I knew a shadow walked among us, carrying something meant to wound. I noticed the envelope first, cream-colored, heavy, almost too formal for a wedding gift. It rested in her hand like a secret she could not wait to reveal. She moved with the confidence of someone certain that her words would sting and her performance would be remembered. Around us, the vineyard glowed with sunlight, but in that small space where she stood, the light felt sharp, as if ready to expose rather than warm. I could already hear the future whispers of guests repeating whatever she planned to say. That thought pressed against my chest, heavier than the warm September air. The envelope was more than paper and ink. It was a weapon, polished and dressed in ceremony, waiting for its moment. I kept my eyes on it, knowing that when it opened, it would not just be a gift, it would be the spark that set everything else in motion. The question was simple but terrifying. Would this day be remembered for love, or would it be scarred by humiliation? I held my breath, unsure which way the story would turn. And in that pause, as laughter echoed across the vineyard, I knew we were standing at the edge of something far larger than a wedding toast. This was the beginning of a reckoning. I never forgot the choice I made after finishing my MBA. While classmates fought for internships in glass towers and dreamed of corner offices, I turned my back on polished floors and skyscraper windows. I chose soil, seasons, and a husband who worked with his hands. To many, it looked like a waste. To my sister Victoria, it became her favorite story to tell about me, always framed as proof of lost potential. Victoria lived in a world of glass. Her career was measured by titles that sounded impressive at parties, by clothes that caught attention before she spoke, by apartments with walls of windows that looked down on city lights. Her life sparkled, but it was fragile, as glass always is. One hard truth could shatter it. Yet she carried herself like someone untouchable, convinced reflection was the same as substance. My life grew in roots. Roots are not glamorous. They are hidden in dirt, twisted and often ignored. But they hold steady when storms come. I learned patience in harvest cycles, discipline in early mornings, and pride in work that fed families. While she polished the glass, I sank deeper into earth. And every time we met, she reminded me which one of us she thought was winning. Flashbacks come easily because the words never left me. Christmas 2010, wine glasses clinked and she laughed about me counting carrots. Thanksgiving 2015, she boasted of million-dollar campaigns and dismissed our contract with Whole Foods as quaint. At Emma's graduation, she suggested my daughter spend a summer with her in San Francisco so she could see real success. Each time her tone carried that same edge. Not anger, pity dressed as superiority. It was never just her words. It was how she used her children as mirrors. They repeated lines like farm life smelled dirty or that real careers happened in tall buildings, not barns. She smiled as they said it, proud of her influence, while I drove home with Emma's tears soaking the car seat. Roots do not answer back to glass. They just grow deeper, waiting. But the cuts left marks. Even my parents played a role. They looked at her shiny life and called her ambitious. When I tried to explain the weight of her constant remarks, they told me not to be so sensitive. She is just driven, they said. Success changes people. So I learned to swallow it year after year, even when my dignity tasted like dust. Victoria built a life on appearances. Every party she hosted sparkled, every photo she posted polished, but behind it was debt, exhaustion, and a desperate need for applause. I knew it, she knew it, yet she clung to her glass world as if admitting the cracks would destroy her. And maybe it would. My world looked small to her, but it carried the kind of strength glass can never have. The truth is that silence became my shield. I told myself I was choosing grace, but silence without boundaries is not grace. It is surrender. It is standing by while someone chips away at your worth. Dignity is not passive. Without roots that defend themselves, it becomes weakness disguised as patience. And as I stood preparing for Emma's wedding, I knew I was about to learn whether my roots were strong enough to finally push back against the glass. The vineyard glowed under a late afternoon sun, every row of vines neat as if brushed by hand. Lavender tied to the aisle chairs swayed gently, carrying a sweetness through the warm air. Guests began to arrive in soft clusters, their voices a mix of laughter and curiosity, the kind of sound that fills a space before something important begins. The barn, polished and decorated, stood like a guardian ready to hold memories for generations. It looked perfect, almost too perfect, as if daring fate to test its balance. Emma's wedding was the kind of day you imagine for your child. The dress fit her like it had been waiting for this moment. The flowers chosen months before were at their brightest bloom, and even the sky seemed to cooperate with an easy blue that promised nothing would go wrong. I wanted to believe that promise, but unease pressed on me like a shadow. I knew she was coming. The gravel cracked under the weight of her car before I saw it. A sleek Tesla rolled up the drive, its shine throwing back the sunlight in sharp angles. Out stepped Victoria, her heels sinking slightly into the dirt, as if the ground itself wanted to resist her presence. Her dress was designer, layered with detail that screamed price rather than taste. Behind her trailed Robert, shifting in his tailored suit like a man who would rather be anywhere else. She lifted her chin and let her eyes sweep across the setting with that familiar smirk. Rustic, she called it once before, and I could almost hear the word in the silence between us now. The difference between us could not have been clearer. David's hands were lined from years of soil, yet he carried himself with quiet pride as he greeted arriving guests. I wore a simple dress I had chosen for comfort as much as style. We represented the farm, the work, the roots. Victoria arrived as if stepping onto a stage, each detail of her appearance chosen to remind everyone that she belonged to another world. She greeted people at the entrance like she owned the event, her laugh too loud, her compliments laced with comparison. When a neighbor mentioned our farm stand, she countered with talk of boardrooms and campaigns. She made sure to speak just enough for others to hear. Every word was a thread weaving herself into the center of attention. Guests smiled politely, but I could see the confusion in their eyes, wondering why she needed to announce herself so loudly. Then I noticed the envelope. Cream-colored, thick, pulled from her bag with careful precision. She waved it once to the coordinator as if sharing a secret that was too important to hide for long. My chest tightened, recognizing it as more than paper. It was her weapon, dressed as a gift. My mind ran through every possibility, each one ending with my daughter humiliated on her wedding day. As the clock moved closer to the ceremony, the tension grew sharper. Guests took their seats, the chatter softened, and the weight of the moment settled over the vineyard. Yet Victoria lingered near the front, her body angled to the aisle, her eyes always scanning for the right moment to make her move. She was not here to celebrate, she was here to perform. I squeezed David's hand, drawing strength from the calm that lived in him. He met my glance and gave the faintest nod, but even he could not fully hide the muscle twitching at his jaw. We both knew the pattern. She would find a way to turn the spotlight from Emma to herself, and with that envelope in her hand, she was already rehearsing how to do it. The beauty of the day stood in front of us, but behind it, I could feel the glass edges of her ambition pressing against the roots we had built. Something was going to break. Victoria rose with the kind of confidence that belonged on a stage, not at her niece's wedding. Her dress shimmered under the lights as she smoothed it and accepted the microphone from the young MC. She thanked him with a smile that looked generous but carried an edge, then turned toward the crowd as if the room itself had been waiting for her. Her voice started warm, the kind of tone meant to sound affectionate, yet I knew that warmth well. It was the surface glow that always hid the blade. She began with memories of my own wedding, painting a picture of me fresh out of Northwestern, full of potential. Guests chuckled lightly, some nodding at the thought of youthful beginnings. But then she tilted her words, suggesting that the promise of that day had been wasted. It landed like a stone in my stomach, the subtle turn that only I and a few others could hear clearly. She was wrapping her condescension in nostalgia, disguising pity as praise. The pattern was too familiar. I remembered Christmas years earlier, her glass of wine raised as she asked how many carrots I had counted that week, while relatives shifted uncomfortably. I remembered Thanksgiving when she compared her $1 million campaign to the bookkeeping I did for our farm, her laugh echoing across the table while I forced a smile. At Emma's graduation, she had offered to take my daughter to San Francisco so she could see real ambition, dismissing our life as small. Each memory played behind her words now like ghosts at the edges of the room. The audience listened, unaware of the wounds she was pressing. To them, she was a polished executive speaking with authority, giving what sounded like a heartfelt reflection. But I heard the rhythm too well. Compliment, pause, then the cut. Every phrase slid in like a knife hidden beneath lace. My chest grew tight as I watched Emma at the head table, her shoulders shrinking slightly at the mention of my so-called wasted career. I wanted to stand, to stop her, but the weight of the moment held me down. Part of me still clung to dignity, the belief that silence was strength. Yet another part screamed that silence had only given her more room to strike. David's hand rested on mine under the table, steady but firm, his jaw locked as if holding back words of his own. Victoria kept talking, her voice calm, her smile flawless, and the crowd kept nodding, unaware they were witnessing the opening of a wound 15 years in the making. I felt the sting of each sentence like salt pressed into skin, knowing this was only the beginning. Victoria's tone softened again, the kind that pretends to care, but her words shifted their aim. She turned from me to Emma, praising her beauty and her future before planting the seed of doubt. She reminded the room that Emma did not have to follow her mother's path, that she was capable of more than settling for a simple life. The phrase "simple life" hung in the air like smoke, heavy and choking. Emma's smile faltered, and I felt the air leave my lungs. The guests shifted in their chairs. A few glanced at me with uneasy expressions, unsure if they should smile or frown. The whispers began, hushed but spreading across the tables. I caught the judge at Marcus's family table raising an eyebrow, her disapproval sharp. Even the young MC looked trapped, clutching his note cards with no idea how to stop the unraveling. Victoria ignored them all, her voice steady, her presence commanding, as if humiliation disguised as advice was her gift of wisdom. Inside, I battled myself. Every part of me wanted to snatch the microphone from her hands, to shout the truth, to defend Emma from the shame dripping into her heart. But another voice reminded me of every time I had been told not to overreact, not to make a scene, to be the bigger person. Years of swallowing my pride sat in my chest like a stone. I watched Emma's shoulders hunch, the same posture she had carried through high school when Victoria's comments made her feel small. That image stabbed deeper than any insult directed at me. Victoria pressed on, recalling Emma's achievements only to twist them into warnings. She painted Emma's college acceptance as a stepping stone to bigger things, then turned the words to imply our farm was a trap. Her smile never slipped, her earrings caught the light, and to anyone not listening closely, she seemed gracious. But I could hear the venom hidden in the rhythm of her speech. Every sentence wrapped its claws around my daughter's dignity. The room felt smaller by the second. Silverware stilled, conversations died, and all eyes were fixed on the stage where Victoria tightened her grip on the spotlight. I gripped David's hand under the table, my pulse pounding, my throat dry. He gave the faintest nod, but his jaw was locked, and I could tell he was as close to breaking as I was. Then Victoria reached for the envelope, holding it high enough for the crowd to see. Her smile widened, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. The silence was unbearable, thick with dread, and I knew the real storm was only seconds away. Tyler shifted at the edge of the stage, his eyes darting to his phone again and again. The glow of the screen lit his worried face, and he whispered something to the coordinator that I could not hear. My stomach twisted as I realized he was watching for something, waiting for someone, but I had no idea who. Beside me, David squeezed my hand 3 times, the quiet signal we had shared for years. It meant trust me. His calm felt deliberate, almost rehearsed, as if he knew more than he was letting on. I wanted to believe him, but my pulse hammered too loudly for comfort. The room had shifted from polite attention to a tense silence. Guests leaned forward slightly, some glancing toward the doors, others trying not to meet my eyes. Even the clink of glasses had stopped, leaving only the hum of the microphone as Victoria lifted the envelope. The air grew heavy, the kind of stillness that comes right before a storm breaks. Victoria smiled as she held it high, turning slowly so the cream paper caught the light. She savored the moment, confident that whatever was inside would pierce me and stain Emma's wedding forever. The sight made my throat tighten, but something in David's stillness kept me frozen in my seat. Tyler checked his phone one last time, his lips parting as if ready to interrupt, but Victoria pressed on. All the tension in the vineyard funneled into that single envelope, and I knew that once it opened, nothing would ever be the same. The doors at the back of the barn swung open with a rush of cool air, pulling every head in the room toward the entrance. A tall man in a travel-worn suit walked in, followed by 2 younger associates, and the quiet authority in his step silenced the whispers instantly. Tyler nearly stumbled to meet him, relief flooding his face as he hurried to the microphone. The name fell into the silence like a stone into still water. Mr. James Harrison, Vice President of Procurement for the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Group. For a heartbeat, the room stayed frozen, and then a wave of murmurs rippled through the guests. Victoria's smile faltered as she tightened her grip on the envelope, her confidence cracking under the weight of a presence she had not expected. David rose from his chair, shaking Mr. Harrison's hand with the ease of an old partner. Their exchange was warm, practiced, the kind that only comes from long hours of work already done. When Tyler announced the exclusive contract between Thompson Organic Farms and Ritz-Carlton, the barn erupted in gasps and applause. I caught sight of Emma's eyes widening as the truth finally broke through the years of humiliation. Victoria stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, the envelope limp in her hand. The spotlight that once clung to her now shifted entirely to the man who spoke with calm certainty about our farm's reputation and the value of our work. Every title she had boasted, every dig she had made, dissolved into the air like dust. She had come to expose me as small, but in front of 200 witnesses, her glass world shattered. David lifted his glass, his soil-stained hands steady and proud. I looked at the tables around us, plates filled with vegetables grown on the very land she mocked. The truth was impossible to ignore. The soil she dismissed as dirt was the same soil feeding every guest in that room. Emma stood slowly, her dress catching the light as she reached for the microphone still dangling in Victoria's hand. Her voice shook at first, but steadied as she faced the guests. She said she was not ashamed of where she came from, that the farm was not a burden, but a choice, and she would carry that choice proudly. The strength in her words erased the shrinking posture I had seen before, and for the first time she stood tall in front of everyone. A hush filled the barn as her words settled. Marcus gripped her hand, his face proud, and even his parents, who had built their own lives in courtrooms and operating rooms, looked at her with respect. My father's eyes glistened, and my mother pressed a hand to her chest as if holding in years of unsaid pride. The air had shifted. What began as an attempt to humiliate had transformed into a moment of revelation. Then my mother-in-law rose, her cane steady, her voice firm despite her age. She reminded everyone that 3 generations had built the farm with integrity and that hard work in soil was no less noble than work in a city tower. Her words carried weight that silence could not ignore. She looked straight at Victoria, not with anger, but with clarity, and the message was unmistakable. Honor was not measured by status, but by character. Marcus's mother followed, her presence sharp as the courtroom she commanded. She admitted she once thought farming was lesser, but watching our family had changed her. Authenticity, she said, cannot be bought. It must be lived. Her words struck the room like a gavel, and the judgment was final. The quiet applause that followed grew louder, a release of tension that had held every guest captive. I rose then, taking the microphone from Emma with hands that no longer trembled. I spoke of dignity, not as silence but as strength that sets boundaries with grace. I reminded them that real success is not about proving others wrong, but about building something worth believing in. I looked at Emma and Marcus, telling them that happiness rooted in truth will outlast any fragile ambition dressed in glitter. Finally, I shared one more gift. We would donate $50,000 to a scholarship fund for students told that farming was not a real career. It was not about money. It was about purpose, about giving voice to those who needed to know their work mattered. The barn erupted in applause, but this time it was not the kind that follows spectacle. It was the sound of a community standing with us, affirming that authenticity had triumphed over appearances. In that moment, I felt years of quiet wounds begin to heal. Emma's shoulders no longer bent under shame. David's steady presence glowed with pride, and I knew the story of this wedding would not be about humiliation. It would be about reclaiming dignity, about choosing to stand in the truth no matter how loud the voices of doubt. The roots we had planted held firm, and no storm of glass could break them. Victoria's face had drained of color by the time she lowered the envelope, her hand trembling as the applause for our farm still echoed through the barn. She tried to smile, but it cracked like glass under pressure. Guests whispered behind their hands, their eyes no longer admiring her dress or jewels, but studying her like someone finally exposed. Her children stared at the floor, their cheeks red with embarrassment, while Robert sat frozen, shoulders slumped as if carrying years of silence. When she finally moved, it was not with her usual poise. Her heels clicked too sharply, echoing against the wood as she hurried toward the exit. Her once commanding stride looked like retreat, her designer dress clinging to her in a way that seemed less glamorous and more suffocating. The Tesla door slammed shut, but the sound did not erase the sting of her collapse. Robert stayed behind for a moment, his face heavy with shame. He leaned close and admitted what no one had dared to say aloud. The company was failing. The penthouse was mortgaged 3 times over. The cars were leased and payments were overdue. Everything that had shimmered on the outside was hollow, propped up by debt and bravado. He confessed she had been drowning in the image she created, and now there was nothing left to hold it together. The truth spread quickly among the guests, carried in low murmurs and knowing glances. People who once nodded at her titles now saw only the fragility behind them. The contrast was unbearable. For years she had built her world of glass, shining and reflective, but one honest moment shattered it completely. The barn, filled with warmth and community, stood solid as ever, while she fled into the night with nothing but broken pride. 6 months later, my phone lit up with Victoria's name, and I knew the call would not be easy. Her voice was thin, stripped of the confidence that once filled every room. She begged for $50,000 to cover legal fees, promising to pay me back, promising anything if I would just rescue her one more time. I listened quietly, then told her no. The silence on the line was sharp, followed by sobs that sounded more like a child than the woman who once mocked my life. I explained I would not fund another illusion, but I would connect her with a financial counselor and a therapist who specialized in status anxiety. Real help, not another bailout. At first, she resisted, accusing me of punishment, but I held my ground. Boundaries, I told her, were not cruelty, but the only way forward. I offered to cover the costs of therapy and counseling, but not to feed the cycle that had already destroyed her peace. My voice shook, but I stayed steady, because compassion without truth only repeats the damage. Weeks later, she sent Emma a handwritten letter, 3 pages of apology, raw and clumsy, but honest. Emma read it twice before agreeing to meet her for coffee. Their conversation lasted just an hour, but Emma said it was the first time her aunt had asked questions instead of giving lectures. For once, she had listened. Roots do not grow overnight. They push slowly into the ground, unseen but steady. Victoria was learning that same lesson, her life rebuilt not by glittering glass but by the patient work of truth. It was not redemption finished, but redemption beginning, and that was enough. Looking back, I realized success was never about silencing my sister or proving her wrong. It was about proving myself right, about knowing that the choices I made with David built something real. That truth had always been there, steady as the soil beneath our feet, even when others refused to see it. The farm became more than land. It became a symbol of discipline, of roots strong enough to survive storms and still feed life around them. Prestige may shine for a season, but roots endure. They grow deep, they hold fast, and they remind us that strength is not measured by appearances, but by what can weather the weight of time. As I shared our story with the world, I understood that many carry wounds like mine. Wounds from voices that cut under the mask of love, wounds from being told their path was too small or their choices unworthy. To those people, I want to say this: dignity is not in silence alone. It is standing firm with grace, setting boundaries, and choosing authenticity no matter who doubts you. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to draw a line with someone who tried to make you feel less than enough? How did you reclaim your dignity and protect your peace? Share your story in the comments, because your voice may give courage to someone else who needs it today. And if this story spoke to you, like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe so these lessons of resilience and truth can reach more people. Remember, success is not a suit or a title. It is the quiet confidence that you are building something worth believing in. It is choosing roots over glass, soil over show, truth over illusion. Carry that with you, and no one can take it away.